A bartender in Australia walks up to an automatic teller machine after midnight and finds a mistake worth 1.6 million Australian dollars. His name is Dan Saunders. He is 29 years old. He works behind a bar in Wangaratta, Victoria, in the kind of town where people know your face, your job, your car, and roughly what kind of life you can afford. He is not a banker. He is not a hacker. He is not a programmer. He does not have a crew waiting outside. He uses his own card, his own accounts, and his own name. The machine tells him the transaction has failed. Then it lets him take the cash anyway. 4 to 5 months later, Dan has burned through around 1.6 million Australian dollars. Restaurants, hotels, gambling, flights, gifts, parties, private jet money. A bartender who should be counting tips is now walking into rooms where people assume he belongs to a different tax bracket. And the strangest part is not that he finds the mistake. The strangest part is how many times he walks back to the same kind of machine before one of Australia's biggest banks finally catches up. The bank is National Australia Bank, one of the major financial institutions in Australia. It handles salaries, mortgages, savings accounts, credit cards, business accounts, and the numbers ordinary people check before they decide whether they can go out or stay home. Banks are fast when a customer owes them money. A late payment becomes a fee. A card over the limit becomes a decline. A bad transfer becomes your problem until you prove otherwise. But in 2011, according to Dan's later interviews and reporting on the case, the mistake runs in the other direction. For a few hours late at night, the system appears to give money to the customer before the bank fully understands what just happened. The first night starts small. Dan is out late after work. He wants to check his balance. The automatic teller machine cannot show it properly. He tries moving money from a credit account to a savings account. The amount is small compared with what comes later, around 200 Australian dollars. The transfer appears to fail. That should be the end. The screen says, no, the balance looks wrong. A normal customer walks away and assumes the bank is having a bad night. Dan looks again and realizes the cash is available. He withdraws it. The machine counts the notes. Dan takes the cash. No alarm sounds. No card is swallowed. No message says fraud review. No guard walks over. He has not broken a door, forced a lock, or used another person's identity. He has asked the bank machine a question. The machine has answered in 2 different ways, and one of those answers is cash. He comes back and tests it. That is where the story changes. One strange withdrawal can be confusion. The second becomes curiosity. The third becomes a pattern. Reports around the case describe Dan testing the glitch with amounts like 200, 500, and 600 Australian dollars. Each test gives him the same impossible answer. The machine behaves as if the transfer has not gone through, but the money can still become available. Now Dan has a process. Not a full plan yet, not an escape strategy, just a repeatable sequence. Arrive late, use his own card, move money between his own accounts, watch the transaction appear to fail, withdraw the cash, leave before the rest of the bank catches up. The window matters. Late at night, somewhere between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., the bank's systems appear to behave differently. The exact internal failure has never been fully explained in public by National Australia Bank in a way an ordinary viewer can verify line by line. The safe version is simple. A bank is not one brain. It is a chain of systems that all have to agree at the same time. One part reads the card. One part sees the account. One part records the transfer. One part settles the balance later. During the late-night processing window, those parts appear to fall out of sync. One piece of the bank treats money as available before the rest of the bank corrects the account. Dan does not hack the bank. He arrives during the moment when the bank is briefly arguing with itself. That is the trap. A machine can make an error and still feel official. It can display a message, print a receipt, give cash, and make the whole thing look approved. But an error is not permission. A delay is not approval. Dan either does not understand that yet, or he understands it and keeps returning anyway. The automatic teller machine becomes an appointment. While most of Wangaratta is asleep, Dan knows there is a window where the rules seem softer. In daylight, he pours drinks, talks to customers, wipes counters, and lives inside a normal income. After midnight, he has a second routine. He checks the hour. He goes to the machine. He uses the same kind of transfer. He tests whether the gap is still open. If it works, he leaves with cash. At first, the cash blends into normal life. A dinner becomes easier. A round of drinks becomes his. A night out runs longer than it should. The people around him are not police or lawyers yet. They are friends at the table, co-workers from the bar, customers who recognize him, people who know Dan as the guy with a normal job and a normal budget. Suddenly, he is the one telling everyone not to worry about the bill. He pays before the table starts dividing the check. He says yes in places where his old bank balance would have said no. Then the spending gets a rhythm. One night, a restaurant bill lands on the table, and Dan reaches for it first. Another night, the hotel room is not the cheap option. Another night, gambling money goes onto the table like it came from a paycheck that never existed. A friend needs help, and Dan can help. A plan turns expensive, and Dan makes it happen. He is not hiding the money in a shoebox. He is turning it into visible moments. A server sees a customer paying. A hotel worker sees a booking. A casino worker sees a bet. Friends see generosity. Co-workers see confidence. Bar customers see a man whose lifestyle no longer matches the man they thought they knew. Nobody has the full picture, but everyone can see a piece. In a small social world, sudden money is not invisible. It is a light left on in a dark room. The question follows every payment. Where is it coming from? The answer is always the same machine. Dan keeps returning. The late-night window becomes a second job, except this job does not pay wages. It pays consequences on delay. He has to think about the hour. He has to think about whether the machine will work again. He has to think about how much he can take and how long the gap will stay open. In a classic heist, the crew wants one clean exit. Dan does not have one exit. He has a loop. Return to the machine, move the money, take the cash, spend, repeat. The numbers grow. A few hundred Australian dollars becomes a few thousand. A few thousand becomes tens of thousands. Tens of thousands become the kind of spending no bartender can explain. Restaurants are no longer occasional treats. Hotels become part of the story. Gambling becomes part of the story. Flights become part of the story. Gifts become part of the story. Parties become part of the story. Each category adds people. Servers, front desk staff, dealers, friends, drivers, airline staff. Every person sees only their small slice, but the trail gets longer. At one point, the story reaches the image that makes it impossible to forget. Reports describe private jet travel. Some accounts describe a private jet charter that may have cost around 90,000 Australian dollars, a figure that should be verified against the final source before production. But even without leaning too hard on that exact number, the image works because the contrast is absurd. A bartender from Wangaratta connected to private jet money because a failed-looking transfer at an automatic teller machine after midnight keeps turning into cash. That image does more than make the story feel expensive. It makes the story louder. A restaurant leaves a record. A hotel leaves a record. Gambling leaves a record. Flights leave records. A private jet is not an escape from evidence. It is evidence with wings. Dan is not building a quiet future. He is building a public past that someone else can reconstruct later. Then the machine gets a voice. According to Dan, representatives from the bank sometimes contact him about transactions. Somewhere inside National Australia Bank, a transaction looks strange enough for someone to ask a question. The phone rings, And now the mistake is no longer just a screen after midnight. It is a person from the bank asking if the activity is his. From the narrowest angle, Dan can answer yes. He made the transactions. He used his own card. He stood at the machine. He did not steal a stranger's identity. He did not pretend to be another customer. The call ends. The card still works. The money continues. That moment gives him the worst possible signal. Not approval, not forgiveness, not legal permission. Delay. A bank employee asks a question, Dan answers, and the pattern does not immediately stop. The next night, the same window is still there. The machine still works. The cash still comes out. Dan has a new reason to keep going, because if the bank saw something and did not stop it, maybe the bank knows. If the bank knows and nothing happens, maybe it is not as serious as it feels. If this were really theft, surely the account would freeze. Surely the card would die. Surely someone would come in daylight and end it. But large systems can be slow before they become powerful. Dan mistakes the slow part for the whole system. The spending starts changing shape. At the beginning, it buys pleasure. Then it buys attention. Then it buys the next reason to return to the machine. A gambling loss is no longer only a loss. It is pressure to go back. A hotel bill is no longer only a room. It is a record with a date. A restaurant receipt is no longer only dinner. It is another line in a life that does not match his wages. The same objects that made him look rich begin turning into evidence. Dan moves through this life with more people around him than the short version usually shows. Friends see him pay. Co-workers see him change. Bank staff ask questions. Journalists later listen. Lawyers eventually read the file. A judge finally counts the consequences. The case does not stay between one man and one machine. Every time Dan spends, another person becomes part of the outer edge of the story. The total keeps climbing toward around 1.6 million Australian dollars. By then, the case is no longer about one late-night error. It is about months of repeated decisions. Every withdrawal creates a record. Every transfer leaves a trail. Every dinner, hotel, bet, gift, flight, and party becomes another visible piece of a life that no longer matches the person living it. Then the fear starts showing up in actions. Dan checks what has happened. He thinks about the next call. He watches the same ordinary objects differently. A receipt that made him feel powerful on Friday looks dangerous by Monday. A hotel lobby no longer feels like luxury. It feels like a place that knows his name. The automatic teller machine no longer feels like a secret door. It feels like the place he has to return because the version of himself he built cannot survive without it. This is where the loop starts breaking. He can go back again and make the number worse. He can try to run, but he has used his own name the whole time. He can wait for the bank to stop him, but the wait is now part of the punishment. Or he can stop before someone physically stops him. He stops. According to the reporting around the case, Dan ends the behavior and tries to contact National Australia Bank. That detail matters because the simplified version often jumps straight from glitch to luxury to television confession to prison. The cleaner version is stranger. He stops first. He tries to bring the problem into daylight. The thing that has been happening after midnight becomes something he wants the bank to handle officially. But the story does not close neatly. There is no instant arrest scene, no squad car waiting outside, no bank executive with a perfect explanation, no dramatic moment where the automatic teller machine that paid him finally takes him back. Instead, there is more delay. This time, the delay is not exciting. The money is mostly gone. The luxury life is fading. The old life is still there, but it does not fit the same way. Dan is standing after the spending and before the consequences, where every day feels like the system is still loading. So he makes the story public. Dan talks to journalists. Adam Shan becomes one of the key media figures connected to the later telling of the case. Now the story has a new cast. Reporters, producers, editors, viewers, and the public. They hear the ingredients and instantly understand why the case travels. Ordinary bartender, major Australian bank, late-night window, failed-looking transfers, 1.6 million Australian dollars. Restaurants, hotels, gambling, flights, gifts, private jet stories. A man who eventually stops and tells people what happened. For viewers, the public version feels almost like revenge. Banks are not sentimental. They do not feel sorry for overdrafts. They do not become gentle when a customer makes a mistake. They send fees, warnings, declines, and letters. So when the bank makes the mistake, and the ordinary customer is the one holding the cash, people want the bartender to win. They want the machine to look stupid. They want the institution to feel, for once, what ordinary people feel when the numbers turn against them. But courtrooms do not work like comment sections. By the time Dan reaches court, the public version and the legal version are no longer the same story. The public version is a bartender who found a flaw in a giant bank. The legal version is a man who used money that did not belong to him again and again. The restaurants are gone. The hotels are gone. The gambling money is gone. The flights are gone. The private jet image is gone. The friends, the nights out, the temporary identity, all of it collapses into documents, dates, amounts, and responsibility. Dan pleads guilty. That is the wall at the end of the story. The machine may have paid him, but the law says the money was not his. He receives 12 months in prison, followed by 18 months of community corrections. Reports also describe a repayment or compensation figure of around 250,000 Australian dollars, though coverage uses different labels for that obligation. The important point is simple. He does not keep the fortune. He does not retire. He does not vanish. He does not beat National Australia Bank and disappear into a clever ending. He goes to prison. Then he comes out, and after touching around 1.6 million Australian dollars, after living for a few months above every limit his old life had placed around him, Dan returns to hospitality work. That ending is sharper than a movie ending because it is so ordinary. No island, no hidden millions, no perfect loophole. A bar, a shift, a wage. The same kind of world that existed before the machine started saying yes. National Australia Bank survives because institutions like that usually do. The case becomes embarrassing, then documented, then absorbed into the larger system. Errors are reviewed, processes change, cards keep working, accounts keep opening, transfers keep moving, fees keep appearing. The bank continues. Dan does not continue in the same way. He becomes the story people repeat when they want to talk about free money, bank errors, and what happens when a person mistakes a delay for permission. Dan Saunders does not beat the bank in the end. He exposes one weak moment inside it. For a few months, the power balance flips in the most absurd way possible. A bartender with a bank card moves faster than a major financial institution. The system that normally tells ordinary people no keeps saying yes. Then the delay ends. The bank counts. The court counts. The life he built from the gap collapses back into the number that created it. Between those two failures sit around 1.6 million Australian dollars, a few months of luxury, and the kind of lesson no receipt prints at the machine. A machine can be wrong. That does not make the money yours. Dan Saunders finds the crack after midnight. He steps into it with a bartender's paycheck and walks out with a millionaire's lifestyle. Restaurants, hotels, gambling, gifts, travel, private jet stories, all of it comes through the same small opening in the system. Then the opening closes. When it does, he is not a millionaire. He is not untouchable. He is not the man who beat the bank. He is a bartender with a prison sentence, a public story, and the most expensive receipt of his life. The money comes out after midnight. The bill arrives in daylight.